So the claim then is that if God was to get involved in human affairs, if he was to intervene in our affairs, that in some way that would limit our free will. You lucky, lucky people, because this is the third instalment of this tremendously exciting series where I revisit old arguments that I've made in the past and tack a little bit on at the end. I'll be tacking a little bit more than a little bit on at the end, if that makes any sense this time. Most of it's going to be back-weighted or whatever it's called on this particular video, and again it's going to link to the second instalment as the second instalment linked to the first. Don't expect to be that to be a feature of the whole series. That's just the way I'm rolling at the moment. So what we're talking about here is God and whether his actions impact on our free will. And there are two ways in which this argument is made. One of them I'm going to talk about in a minute. The way I'm not going to talk about, I'm going to talk about first, which is in terms of impacting on our free will to believe in him. You must have heard this before. This is the idea of why we have this kind of divine hiddenness. Fucking forget about the fact, because it's a really inconvenient fact, that throughout the Old Testament God keeps fucking revealing himself ad infinitum, and just pretend that didn't actually happen. Now the reason God doesn't intervene now is because were he to manifest himself to us, then he would take away our free will as to whether or not to believe in him. It's kind of like our arms would be twisted. We would have no choice but to accept that he exists, and by doing so, obviously all of us would manage to avoid the fate of burning in hell for all of eternity, which would obviously be a tragic outcome were that to happen. So God has to avoid that at all costs. But I don't really want to look at that. That isn't what the subject of this video is going to be about. In fact, before I say that, I did give an example. I did do another video, seeing as we are revisiting videos. I did a video in the past looking at that and looking at the logic behind that and saying, let's take that logic and start using that logic in our courts of law. We want our courts of law to work well. So why don't we apply the same logic to juries? We don't want to take away juries' free will, do we? We don't want to twist their arm. We want them to be able to make a free and unfettered decision. But where we've obviously been going wrong is we've been trying to allow them to make a free and unfettered decision based on evidence. But clearly that's not the way to do things. Not if we follow God's example. Now what we need to be doing with juries, start the case going, first thing you ask the jury, do you find the defendant guilty or not guilty? Get their response. They can just pick up a response off the top of their heads, and then we leave it at that. Don't bother with all this bollocks about presenting evidence. You're only going to take away the jury's free will. That was an argument that I made for that. But in terms of this non-intervention, you know, and just generally with human affairs, well, why hasn't God done this? Why hasn't God done that? If he did that, if he intervened like that, Jim, you know what he'd do? He'd take away our free will. And that's why he has to keep hands off and just let human affairs pan out however they do. Now, an argument that I've always brought forwards, and it's often been linked with free will and God's action and also the morality of God's action, but it certainly links in with free will, is this idea of the tsunami. I mentioned it in the last video. I may have said 2005 in the last video. It was 2004. It was in the Indian Ocean. Significantly more than 200,000 people died in that tsunami across multiple countries. Terrible tragedy. Most of us would think, maybe not God, but most of us would say that that was a terrible tragedy. If only we could have done something, we would have done something to stop that happening. The example that I've always given is, why doesn't God, he doesn't want to reveal himself, he wants to stay hidden so that we can maintain our free will, whether to believe in him or not, or whatever that argument is. It's still not making any more sense than it was 2 minutes ago. So he wants to remain hidden. So what I've always said is, okay, why doesn't he just plant the thought in your brain, as I mentioned in the last video, go inland 10 miles, go inland 10 miles, and that way he could have saved all these lives. But I have heard as a response to that, he can't do that. If he kind of mind controlled you to go inland 10 miles, he's taking away your free will. Your free will to die in a tsunami. Your free will to choose to die in a tsunami. But there's a big problem with that, isn't there? First, let's consider the 4 groups of people that are involved in this. You've got people that are going to die in the tsunami who, there's nothing they'd rather do than die in a tsunami. It'd be kind of like their life's fucking ambition to die in a tsunami. It is my suggestion. I can't cite you any evidence on this. There's no scientific reports in this, but it's my suggestion to you that that's a pretty small number of people. There are also people that are going to die in that tsunami who would rather not, given the choice, die in that tsunami. What they'd probably say something to you like is, do you know what? Given the choice, I'd probably rather go somewhere else and carry on living. Thank you very much, Mr. Plum, than die in this tsunami. Then you've got the people who are outside of the tsunami, but they live quite close, you know. They could make the tsunami within a few hours. But they don't want to. They don't particularly fancy dying in a tsunami either. And I think there's probably quite a few of those. But then there is the 4th category. That's the people that lie outside of the tsunami district but could get into the tsunami district. Who, again, if only they knew the tsunami was going to happen, they'd have made the journey and got swept away, drowned, maybe had their heads stoved against one concrete lintel with another concrete lintel so that their brain has flown out the top, blood and gore everywhere. Fantastic. That's how they feel about it. Okay? So here's the thing. If God tells these people to go inland, stay inland, he's took away their free will. But where was the free will to begin with? If nobody knew there was a tsunami happening, where was the free will? How did the people outside of the tsunami, where was their free will to decide if they wanted to die in the tsunami, to come to where the tsunami was going to strike? What about the people who were in the, more importantly, I have to say, because I think it's going to be a significantly larger number of people, and we're talking about people who have tragically died now. What about the people who were struck by the tsunami and died, who would really rather have got out and of the way if they could have been able to make that choice? So here's my suggestion. Scratch what I've always said in the past about God giving that thought into people's heads, go inland 10 miles, okay? Because that doesn't really make any difference to free will. They didn't have any free will concerning the tsunami before because they didn't fucking know about the tsunami. By putting that thought in their head, they've got no more free will now and no more less free will than they had before. There'll probably be some more happy, smiling people than there would have been without him doing that. But here's a better thing to do. Rather than putting that thought in their head, why doesn't he do this? Why doesn't he tell all the people in the tsunami zone and all the people just outside of the tsunami zone, there's going to be a tsunami. A tsunami is going to happen in 12 hours' time. If you'd like to take part in the tsunami, please make your way to the coast. If you don't want to take part in the tsunami, please make your way inland. How would God do that, doing that, diminish people's free will? Surely he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone there. 3 birds with 1 stone. He can empower people. He can do the moral thing. And that he can actually increase the amount of free will within the people living in those environments, because now they are able to make an informed choice, just the same as a jury can. Do I want to drown in the tsunami, or do I not want to drown in the tsunami? Okay, well, thank you for watching, and bye for now.